The door slammed behind her for the last time, and Elena Cruz didn't look back. But what if the cage she escaped was nothing compared to the gilded prison waiting on the other side? Rain hammered against the windshield as she drove through the empty streets of Portland, her hands trembling on the wheel. In the back seat, 2 suitcases held everything she'd managed to pack in the 17 minutes David had been at the gym. 17 minutes to dismantle 8 years of marriage. The diamond ring on her left hand caught the glow of a streetlight, and for a moment she almost laughed. Such a small thing to have cost so much. 3 months earlier she'd found the messages. Not the first time, but the time that broke something fundamental inside her. Standing in their marble bathroom at 2 in the morning, David's phone illuminating her face with its cold blue light, Elena had felt herself split into 2 people. The woman who would forgive again, who would believe his tears, who would fold herself smaller and smaller to keep the peace. And the woman who finally understood that survival meant leaving. The safe house was a modest apartment in Seattle, arranged by her sister Maria. Clean walls, functional furniture, silence. After years of David's volcanic moods filling every room with tension, the quiet felt almost violent. Elena sat on the edge of the bed that first night, still in her coat, and waited for the relief everyone promised would come. Instead, there was only a vast emptiness and a question that kept circling. Who was she without him? The gallery opening 3 weeks later was Maria's idea. "Get out," she'd said. "Remember who you were before." Elena had been a photographer once, before David convinced her that it wasn't a real career, that supporting his law practice was more important. She'd agreed, the way she'd agreed to everything, slowly editing herself out of her own life. The Meridian Gallery sat in Seattle's Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and track lighting. Elena moved through the crowd like a ghost, champagne glass in hand, studying the photographs on the walls without really seeing them. Black and white images of the Pacific Northwest, dramatic and moody. Competent, she thought. Safe. "You're not impressed." The voice came from behind her, low and certain. Elena turned to find a man studying her with the same intensity she'd been giving the photographs. Tall, mid-40s, wearing an understated suit that probably cost more than her car. Dark hair silvering at the temples, sharp features, eyes the color of slate before a storm. "Should I be?" she heard herself say. A smile flickered across his face, there and gone like heat lightning. Brutally honest, refreshing. He extended his hand. Alexander Thorne. She knew the name. Everyone did. Tech billionaire, venture capitalist, the man who'd turned 3 startups into industry-defining companies before he was 30. Forbes called him a genius. Business Insider called him ruthless. The Seattle Times had run a profile calling him both, and worse. Elena Cruz. She shook his hand, feeling the controlled strength in his grip. "What would impress you, Elena Cruz?" It was a strange question, intimate in its directness. She glanced back at the photographs, gathering her thoughts. Risk, vulnerability, something that costs the artist to show you. She paused. "These feel like someone playing it safe. Come with me." He didn't wait for her answer, just moved toward a door marked "Private" at the back of the gallery. Elena followed, surprising herself, Maria's worried face in her peripheral vision as she left the crowd behind. The room beyond was smaller, dimly lit, and the photographs on these walls were entirely different. Raw, unsettling images of urban decay and isolated figures. The kind of work that revealed something the artist probably hadn't meant to show. "The photographer's real portfolio," Alexander said, watching her face instead of the images. The gallery thought they were too dark for buyers, too honest. Elena moved closer to a photograph of an empty subway platform, a single figure at the far end, face obscured. You could feel the loneliness radiating from the frame. "They're extraordinary." I thought so too. I bought the entire series. He stepped beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of expensive cologne and something underneath, rain and cedar. I have a theory about you. Do you? You're running from something, and you're terrified that whoever you're becoming next will disappoint you as much as whoever you left behind. The accuracy of it stole her breath. Elena turned to face him, anger and something else rising in her chest. You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I recognize the look. I've worn it. His gaze held hers, intense and strangely gentle. Have dinner with me tomorrow. Every instinct screamed caution. She'd just escaped one controlling man. The last thing she needed was another, and everything about Alexander Thorne radiated power and danger. But beneath the warning bells, something else whispered. A curiosity, a pull she couldn't quite name. Why? She asked. Because you looked at those photographs the way most people look at other people. Like they might mean something. Like they might be worth the risk of actually seeing. He pulled a card from his pocket, pressed it into her palm. 8 o'clock. I'll send a car. He left before she could refuse, disappearing back into the gallery crowd with the easy confidence of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around his desires. Elena stood alone in the private room, his card burning in her hand, and felt the first flutter of something she'd thought David had killed. Not quite hope, not quite desire. Something more dangerous than both. When she told Maria later that night, her sister's face went pale. Alexander Thorne. Elena, do you have any idea what people say about him? What do they say? Maria pulled up her phone, scrolling through articles with shaking hands. That he's brilliant. That he's ruthless. That women fall for him and then... She stopped, looking up. They disappear from public life. His last girlfriend, Sophia Caldwell, she was a journalist. After 2 years with him, she quit her job, stopped seeing friends, just vanished. When she finally left him, she wouldn't talk about what happened. Elena felt cold spread through her chest. Maybe she just wanted privacy. Or maybe he's exactly like David, just with better packaging. But the next evening, Elena found herself in the back of a Mercedes, watching the Seattle skyline slide past as the driver took her to an address in Bellevue. Not a restaurant, she realized as they pulled up to a modern glass house perched on a cliff overlooking the Sound. His home. The door opened before she could knock, and Alexander stood there in dark jeans and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Casual, but even in casual clothes, he looked like he owned the world. You came, he said, and for the first time she heard uncertainty in his voice. I'm not sure why, he smiled, stepping aside to let her in. Neither am I, but I'm glad you did. The house was stunning, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the water view. But it was the interior that caught her attention. Photographs covered nearly every wall, from established masters to unknowns, a curated collection that spoke of genuine passion, not just wealth. You're a collector, she said. I'm obsessed. He poured wine, handed her a glass. Photography, specifically. The moment captured, preserved, made eternal. There's something almost violent about it, stopping time against its will. They ate on the terrace as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Alexander asked about her photography, and Elena found herself talking about it for the first time in years. Not the polite deflections she'd learned to give David, but real answers. What she'd loved about it, what she'd lost when she stopped. Why did you stop? He asked. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to explore. Elena set down her wine glass, watching the last light fade from the sky. Because someone convinced me it didn't matter, she said finally, and I believed him. He was wrong. Alexander's voice was certain, absolute. Show me your work. Whatever you still have. She should have said no, should have finished her wine, called a car, thanked him for the evening and never looked back. But instead, Elena pulled out her phone, scrolling to the album she'd kept hidden even from herself. Photographs from before David, when she'd still believed she might be someone worth becoming. Alexander studied each image in silence, his face unreadable in the gathering dark. When he finally looked up, his eyes held something that made her heart stumble. "These are remarkable," he said quietly, "and I'm going to help you remember who you were." It sounded like a promise. It sounded like a threat. And Eleanor, sitting in a stranger's house overlooking the water, felt herself begin to fall. Retry TM. The weeks that followed blurred together like time-lapse photography, each day collapsing into the next with dizzying speed. Alexander didn't just encourage Elena's return to photography. He orchestrated it with the precision of a general planning a campaign. A fully equipped studio appeared in a building he owned downtown, the lease papers already signed in her name. Top-tier equipment filled the space, cameras she'd only dreamed of touching arranged like soldiers awaiting orders. When she protested, overwhelmed by the enormity of the gift, he simply looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said, "Consider it an investment. I don't make bad investments." She should have heard the possessiveness in those words, should have recognized the pattern. But Alexander was nothing like David. Where her ex-husband had diminished her with criticism disguised as concern, Alexander seemed genuinely fascinated by her talent. He attended her first small showing at a coffee shop gallery, standing in the back with his arms crossed, watching strangers react to her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Afterward, he'd taken her to a late dinner and dissected each photograph with the analytical mind that had built his empire, pointing out strengths she hadn't recognized in her own vision. "You see isolation differently than most photographers," he'd said, studying her across the candlelight. "Not as loneliness, but as a kind of meditation. Your subjects are alone, but they're not lonely. There's a difference." Eleanor had felt something crack open inside her chest. David had never looked at her work. Not really. He'd glanced at photographs the way someone might glance at a child's drawing on a refrigerator. Obligatory, dismissive, already thinking about something else. But Alexander saw, and being seen, truly seen, was intoxicating. They fell into a rhythm. Dinners that stretched past midnight, conversations that ranged from art theory to the ethics of artificial intelligence to whether the universe was fundamentally indifferent or hostile. Alexander revealed himself in pieces, controlled disclosures that felt like gifts. He'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until a high school computer science teacher recognized his gift for systems thinking. He'd built his first company at 23, sold it for $8 million at 25, and never looked back. Success, he said, wasn't about luck. It was about understanding that the world was a game with rules, and those who learned the rules could rewrite them. "And people?" Elena had asked one night, sitting in his living room as rain drummed against the windows. "Are they a game too?" He'd been quiet for a long moment, swirling whiskey in his glass. "People are the most complex system of all," he'd said finally. "Predictable in aggregate, chaotic in specific, but yes, there are patterns, ways of understanding motivation, desire, fear." He'd looked at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "You're difficult to read, I find that compelling." It should have been a warning. Instead, it felt like a compliment. 3 months in, Elena realized she'd stopped thinking about David entirely. The divorce papers had been filed, served, processed with the efficient brutality of legal machinery. Her ex-husband had tried calling twice, then seemed to accept her absence the way he'd accepted everything else, as an inconvenience to be managed and moved past. Maria still worried, still sent articles about Alexander with subject lines like, Please read this, and I'm concerned. But Elena had stopped opening them. Her sister didn't understand. How could she? Maria had never been with someone who made the world feel larger instead of smaller, who treated her potential as something precious rather than threatening. But there were moments, small things that nagged at the edges of Elena's awareness like splinters working their way deeper. The way Alexander always knew where she was, even when she hadn't told him. How his assistant had her schedule, anticipating needs before Elena recognized them herself. The photographs of his ex-girlfriend that Elena had searched for online late one night. Sophia Caldwell, a journalist with sharp eyes and a sharper pen, whose social media had gone dark 3 years ago. Before Alexander, during Alexander, after Alexander, a digital ghost. "Tell me about Sophia," Elena had asked one evening, trying to sound casual as they cooked dinner together in his kitchen. Alexander's knife had paused mid-cut through a bell pepper, just for a heartbeat. Then he'd continued, precise and controlled. "What do you want to know?" "Why it ended." "Because she wanted something I couldn't give her." He'd scraped the vegetables into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence. "She wanted me to be someone I'm not, softer, less focused. She thought love meant sacrificing ambition." He turned to face Elena, his expression unreadable. "I don't believe in that kind of love. I believe in partnership between equals. Two people who push each other toward their best selves, not drag each other down to comfortable mediocrity." It had sounded reasonable. It had sounded right. But that night, alone in her apartment, the one she still kept, despite Alexander's suggestion that she move into his house, Elena had searched harder. Deep into the archives of Sophia's blog, preserved in internet wayback machines. The writing had changed over time. Early posts sparkled with personality, sharp cultural criticism mixed with personal revelation. Later posts became more measured, careful, the edges filed smooth. And then they stopped altogether. One post, dated 2 months before the blog went dark, had made Elena's blood run cold. Sophia had written about control, about how it could masquerade as care, how someone could reshape you so gradually that you didn't notice until you looked in the mirror one day and couldn't recognize your own face. The post never mentioned Alexander by name. It didn't have to. Elena had closed her laptop and sat in darkness, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Was she being paranoid? Projecting her trauma with David onto someone who was genuinely trying to help her? Alexander had never raised his voice, never made her feel small or stupid or wrong. He celebrated her successes, supported her work, treated her like she mattered, but he also knew things, private things, her bank balance, her therapy appointments, the password to her cloud storage where she kept her photographs, small invasions she'd brushed off or excused because he always had a reason, making sure she was safe, wanting to support her career, protecting his investment. The gala was Alexander's idea, a fundraiser for arts education at a 5-star hotel downtown. Elena wore a dress he'd had delivered to her apartment, midnight blue silk that fit perfectly, because of course he knew her size, and felt like an imposter among Seattle's elite. Tech founders and venture capitalists, gallery owners and museum directors, everyone performing success with practiced ease. Alexander moved through the crowd like a shark through water, elegant and dangerous, and Elena watched him work. Saw how people leaned in when he spoke, how they laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, how they competed for scraps of his attention. "You're uncomfortable." The voice belonged to an older woman in a crimson gown, silver hair swept up elegantly. She'd appeared beside Elena at the bar with the timing of someone who'd been watching, waiting. "That obvious?" Elena asked. "Only to someone who's been where you are." The woman extended her hand. "Catherine Marsh, I run the Cascade Foundation." Elena knew the name, one of the largest arts endowments in the Pacific Northwest, funding everything from symphony orchestras to experimental galleries. Elena Cruz, I'm Alexander Thorne's latest protege. I know. Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. He has excellent taste in talent, though I wonder if you've considered the cost of his patronage. The words hung between them like a blade. Elena felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? My foundation was going to fund a project 3 years ago. A documentary series by a brilliant young journalist named Sophia Caldwell, investigating corruption in the tech industry. Catherine sipped her champagne, her gaze steady. Then she started dating Alexander. The project disappeared. She disappeared. And when I tried reaching out, she told me she was no longer interested in that kind of work. Too divisive, she said. Too focused on tearing people down instead of building them up. Catherine's voice carried a weight of disappointment. Those were his words. I recognized them. I'd heard him use that exact phrase at a dinner party. Elena's mouth went dry. Across the room, Alexander was laughing at something a museum director said, his hand resting casually in his pocket, every inch the charming philanthropist. Maybe she just changed her mind. People do. Do they? Catherine turned to face her fully. Or do they get changed? There's a difference, Elena, and I think you're smart enough to know which one you're experiencing. Before Elena could respond, Alexander materialized beside her with the uncanny timing she'd started to notice. His hand found the small of her back, possessive and warm. Catherine, I see you've met Elena. Are you trying to recruit her for one of your projects? Something like that. Catherine's smile was sharp as glass. I was just telling her about the Caldwell documentary. Such a shame it never came to fruition. Though I suppose some stories are better left untold. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's hand pressed harder against Elena's back, not quite painful, but no longer comfortable. Some stories are exercises in cynicism, masquerading as journalism. Sophia made a mature decision to focus on more constructive work. Funny how your partners always seem to reach that conclusion. Catherine set down her glass with finality. Elena, if you ever want to talk about foundations and funding that come without strings, you know where to find me. She walked away, leaving silence in her wake. Don't listen to her, Alexander said quietly, his breath warm against Elena's ear. Catherine's bitter because her foundation is hemorrhaging relevance. She resents anyone who's actually changing the world instead of just talking about it. What happened with Sophia? Elena heard herself ask. Really? His hand dropped from her back. When she turned to look at him, his expression had gone cold in a way she'd never seen before. Not angry, worse, disappointed. Are you really going to let a jealous old woman poison what we have after everything I've done for you? The words felt like a slap. Elena opened her mouth to argue, to explain, but Alexander was already moving away, swallowed by the crowd with the fluid grace of someone who knew exactly how to make an exit. She stood alone by the bar, champagne warming in her hand, and felt the first real fingers of fear close around her heart. She didn't see him for the rest of the evening. When she finally left, exhausted and confused, she found her car blocked by a sleek black SUV in the parking garage. The window rolled down, and Alexander looked out at her with those storm-gray eyes that had first captivated her. "Get in," he said. Not an invitation, a command. Elena hesitated, keys digging into her palm. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to walk away, to call Maria and ask for help. But another part of her, the part that had spent 8 years with David, the part that had learned to doubt her own perceptions, whispered that she was overreacting, that she owed him a conversation, that walking away now would be cruel after everything he'd invested in her. She got in the car. They drove in silence through the rain-slicked streets, heading not toward his house, but toward the waterfront. Alexander parked overlooking the sound, the city lights reflecting off the black water like drowned stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm not a perfect man," Alexander said finally, still staring straight ahead. "I'm controlling. I know this about myself. It's why I'm successful. I can't let go, can't stop optimizing, can't accept less than the best possible outcome." He turned to face her, and in the dim light he looked almost vulnerable. "But everything I've done, Elena, has been because I see something extraordinary in you. Something you don't see in yourself yet. And yes, I push. I orchestrate. I remove obstacles. Because I understand what it takes to actualize potential, and I can't stand watching talent waste itself on false modesty and fear." "It's not modesty to want autonomy," Elena said quietly. "It's not fear to question whether someone else should have access to my entire life. Isn't it?" His voice sharpened. "You were drowning when I found you. A failed marriage, abandoned dreams, no direction. I threw you a lifeline, and now you're going to let people like Catherine Marsh convince you it's a noose?" The comparison to David's arguments was so stark it made her nauseous. Different words, same structure. "You needed me. You're ungrateful. You're being manipulated by others." She'd heard these songs before, knew every verse. "Take me home," she said. "Please." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, anger, calculation. Then his expression smoothed into neutrality. "Of course, if that's what you want." But when they reached her apartment building, Alexander didn't unlock the doors immediately. Instead, he pulled something from his jacket. Her camera. The expensive one he'd given her, the one she'd left at his house 2 days ago. "I had something made for you," he said, holding it out. "Look at the strap." Elena took the camera with shaking hands. Embossed on the leather strap in elegant script were the words, "Elena Cruz, Visionary." Below that, smaller, owned by Alexander Thorne. The world seemed to tilt. "What is this?" "A joke," he said, but his smile didn't match his words. "A reminder that every artist needs a patron, that success is always a collaboration." He reached out, touching her face with careful gentleness. "I own the studio, Elena. The equipment. I funded your first 3 shows. Your success exists because I made it exist. Surely you understand that." She did understand. Finally, terribly, completely. This was never about seeing her potential. It was about owning it. About taking someone broken and rebuilding them in his image, piece by piece, until they couldn't tell where their own desires ended and his began. Elena opened the car door and stepped out into the rain, still clutching the camera. "We're done," she said. "No," Alexander replied calmly. "We're not. You'll realize that once you calm down and think rationally. I'll give you space to process, but you'll come back. They always do." The certainty in his voice was what finally broke through her paralysis. Elena turned and walked into her building without looking back, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the key. Once inside her apartment, she locked the door, slid down to the floor, and finally let herself understand the magnitude of her mistake. She hadn't escaped David's cage. She'd just found a prettier one with a more sophisticated lock. Retry TM. The rain continued through the night, hammering against the windows like accusations Elena couldn't answer. She sat on her apartment floor until dawn, the camera with its grotesque inscription beside her, and tried to map the geography of her own complicity. How many red flags had she explained away? How many small surrenders had accumulated into this total eclipse of self? The math was brutal. Every gift had been a brick in a wall she hadn't noticed being built around her. Every moment of feeling seen had been Alexander learning which buttons to push, which levers to pull. At 6 in the morning, her phone began buzzing. Text messages flooding in, all from Alexander. They started apologetic. "I handled that poorly, let's talk." Then shifted to concerned. "I'm worried about you, please respond." before finally settling into something that made her skin crawl. "I know you're reading these. Your read receipts are on. Elena, this silence is childish. We're adults. We can work through this." She hadn't realized her read receipts were on. Had never turned them on. Which meant he'd had access to her phone at some point, changing settings without her knowledge. Elena felt the walls of her apartment pressing in, suddenly aware that Alexander knew everything about this space. Had probably been here when she wasn't. Had keys she'd never given him. Access she'd never granted. The knock on her door at 7:30 made her jump, heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. She didn't move, barely breathed, waiting in the morning light that felt thin and insufficient. The knock came again, more insistent. Then Maria's voice. "Elena, I know you're in there. Open up or I'm using my spare key." Relief flooded through her so intensely it brought tears. Elena opened the door, and Maria took one look at her face before pulling her into a hug that felt like the first safe thing in months. Her sister smelled like coffee and the lavender detergent she'd used since college, familiar anchors to a world before Alexander. "What happened?" Maria asked, steering her to the couch. Elena told her everything. The gala, Catherine Marsh's warning, the car ride, the camera strap. With each detail, Maria's face grew harder, more frightened. When Elena finished, her sister was quiet for a long moment, staring at the camera on the coffee table like it might bite. "We need to call the police," Maria said finally. "And tell them what? That my boyfriend gave me an expensive gift with a weird inscription? That he knows my passwords? I gave him access, Maria, to everything. I walked into this with my eyes open." "Did you, though?" Maria leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Elena, you came out of an abusive marriage. You were vulnerable. This man saw that and exploited it. That's not consent, that's predation." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and accurate. Elena wanted to argue, to defend herself against the implication of victimhood, but the truth was a weight in her chest. She'd been so desperate to prove she wasn't broken, so eager to believe someone could see value in her, that she'd handed Alexander the tools to dismantle her piece by piece. "I need to get my things from the studio," Elena said. "My real camera, my files, everything that's actually mine." Maria nodded, already reaching for her keys. "I'm coming with you." The studio felt different in morning light, less sanctuary and more crime scene. Elena moved through it mechanically, packing her original equipment, her hard drives, the photographs that predated Alexander's involvement. Maria stood guard by the door, phone in hand, watching the street below through the large windows. They worked in tense silence, both jumping at every sound from the building's other tenants. It was when Elena opened the storage closet that she found them. Files. Physical folders in a locked cabinet she'd never noticed before, hidden behind spare backdrops. The lock was cheap, easy to break with a screwdriver Maria found in a drawer. Inside were dossiers. Thick files on women Elena didn't know, photographs and printed articles and handwritten notes in Alexander's precise script. 7 women total. She recognized Sophia Caldwell's face in one folder, but the others were strangers. Each file detailed a pattern, how they'd met Alexander, how the relationship had progressed, what had happened when they tried to leave. "Oh my God," Maria breathed, reading over Elena's shoulder. "This is a playbook. He's documenting his own manipulation." But it was worse than that. The notes weren't just documentation, they were refinement. Observations about what worked and what didn't. Adjustments to approach based on personality type, specific techniques for different kinds of resistance. One note about Sophia read, "Subject responded poorly to direct control. Future, establish dependency through career advancement first, then gradually limit outside influences. Isolation must feel like choice." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. She wasn't Alexander's partner. She was his experiment, His project, another iteration in a pattern he was perfecting with each woman, learning from each failure, optimizing his approach. "We photograph these," Maria said, voice shaking but determined. "Every page, then we get out of here and go straight to a lawyer." They worked fast, Elena's hands trembling as she documented years of calculated abuse. The folders revealed that Alexander had done this before in other cities, other names. Seattle wasn't his first hunting ground. There were references to women in San Francisco, Portland, even one in Vancouver. Always smart women, talented women, women with something to prove and wounds to exploit. Always the same arc of love bombing and isolation, investment and ownership, until the women either broke completely or fought their way free. They were on the 5th folder when Elena's phone rang. Alexander's name lit up the screen. She stared at it paralyzed, as if answering might make him materialize in the room. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call, then another, then a text. "I know you're at the studio. We need to talk. I'm on my way." "Go," Maria said, shoving files into Elena's bag. "Take these. I'll lock up and meet you at my place. He'll know you helped me." "Let him." Maria's jaw was set in a way Elena recognized from childhood, the stubborn determination that had gotten her sister through law school, through their parents' deaths, through every hard thing life had thrown at their family. "I'm not afraid of him." But Elena was, terrified in a way that went deeper than fear of Alexander himself. Afraid of what it said about her, that she'd fallen for this again, that some broken part of her gravitated toward men who wanted to own rather than love her. She grabbed her bag and ran. The drive to Maria's apartment was a blur of adrenaline and rear-view mirror checks. Elena kept expecting to see Alexander's black SUV behind her, kept imagining his calm voice explaining why she was overreacting, why she misunderstood, why she needed him. The gaslighting was so internalized now that even fleeing from him, she questioned whether she was being dramatic, whether she was throwing away something real because of paranoia and past trauma. Maria's apartment was a fortress of normalcy. Plants on the windowsill, mismatched furniture, photographs of their family on every surface. Elena collapsed on the couch while her sister made tea. Neither of them would drink. A ritual of comfort they'd performed through every crisis since adolescence. "I need to tell you something," Maria said finally, setting down mugs and sitting across from Elena with the weighted posture of someone about to confess. "I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago to look into Alexander." Elena's head snapped up. "You what?" "You stopped answering my calls. You canceled lunch 3 times in a row. Every time I saw you, you seemed smaller somehow, like you were disappearing." Maria's voice cracked. "I watched David do this to you for 8 years. I wasn't going to sit back and watch it happen again." Anger flashed hot and bright through Elena's chest. "You had no right." "I had every right. You're my sister, and I was right to be worried." Maria pulled out her laptop, opened a folder full of documents. Alexander Thorne isn't even his real name. He was born Marcus Thorne in Sacramento. Changed his first name legally when he was 26, right after his first girlfriend filed for a restraining order. That case was sealed, but the investigator found the filing. There are 3 other sealed cases in 3 other states, NDAs signed by at least 6 women. 1 attempted suicide that got buried in a settlement. The room tilted. Elena gripped the couch cushions, trying to anchor herself to something solid. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried. You weren't ready to hear it." Maria's face was anguished, and I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe the investigator had the wrong person. Maybe my own fear was making me see monsters where there were just complicated men. But then you called this morning, and I knew. Elena stared at the files spread across the coffee table, the folders from Alexander's studio and Maria's investigation, 2 different routes to the same terrible truth. She'd been so careful after David, had promised herself she'd never miss the signs again, never let someone reduce her to a supporting character in her own life. And yet here she was, having traded one cage for another, this one just more expensive and better disguised. "There's more," Maria said quietly. The investigator found Sophia Caldwell. She's living in New Mexico under a different name, working at a bookstore. She was willing to talk, off the record. Maria pulled up an audio file, finger hovering over the play button. "Are you ready?" Elena nodded, though she would never be ready. Sophia's voice came through the laptop speakers, tired and careful, the voice of someone who'd learned to measure every word. "He makes you feel like you're special," she said. "Like he sees something in you no one else sees. And maybe he does. Maybe that's what makes him so dangerous. He actually has good taste, can actually recognize talent, but he doesn't want to nurture it. He wants to own it, control it, take credit for it." There was a long pause, the sound of breathing. Then, "I lost 2 years of my life to him. By the end, I couldn't remember which thoughts were mine and which were his. He'd rewritten my personality so gradually, I didn't notice until I looked back at old journals and couldn't recognize the person who wrote them. The me before Alexander had opinions, convictions, boundaries. The me with Alexander just had his opinions reflected back, convinced they were mine." Another pause. "The worst part is, I'm still not entirely sure I made the right choice leaving. That's what he does to you. Even after you escape, his voice stays in your head, questioning every decision, suggesting you're being irrational, reminding you how much you owe him. Some days I wake up and I'm free. Other days I wake up and I'm still his, just living somewhere else." The recording ended. Elena and Maria sat in silence, the afternoon light slanting through the windows in accusatory angles. Elena thought about the studio with her name on the lease, but his money funding it, the shows he'd arranged, the connections he'd made, the career he'd built for her like a dollhouse she was supposed to be grateful to inhabit. "I have to give it all back," Elena said. "The studio, the equipment, everything." "No," Maria said firmly. "You don't. That's what he wants you to think, that his money means ownership, but legally, those were gifts. You don't owe him anything. Except I do." Elena met her sister's eyes. "Not legally, but in every other way that matters. My whole career reboot is built on his foundation. Every success I've had in the last 4 months exists because he made it exist. How do I separate what's mine from what's his?" Maria leaned forward, gripping Elena's hands with fierce intensity. "You take what you've learned and you build something new, something he never touched, something that's yours from the foundation up. But first, we need to make sure he can't hurt you or anyone else again." The plan took shape over the next hours. They would compile everything, the files from the studio, the private investigator's report, Sophia's testimony, statements from any other women willing to come forward. Catherine Marsh had connections in the media, in non-profits that supported abuse survivors. They could build a case, not just legal but public, shining light into the corners where predators like Alexander operated. But as the sun set and Maria ordered takeout neither of them ate, Elena felt a cold certainty settling into her bones. Alexander had known she was at the studio, had known before she'd told anyone, which meant he was watching, tracking, monitoring. The man who'd built a tech empire on understanding systems and patterns wouldn't be caught off guard by something as predictable as a victim fighting back. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you're being smart, you're not. Check your bank account." Elena's hands shook as she opened her banking app. Her account had been drained, completely emptied. $30,000, everything she'd saved, every payment from photography jobs, every penny she'd managed to scrape together after the divorce. Gone. Another text. "Oops. Looks like there was an error in the direct deposit system at your studio. Don't worry, I'm sure the bank will sort it out. Eventually. These things can take months to resolve." Maria was already calling the bank. but Eleanor knew it was futile. Alexander would have covered his tracks perfectly, would have documentation showing she'd authorized the transfer, would have systems in place that made it look like her mistake, her negligence. He'd probably been planning this contingency from the beginning, a dead man's switch to pull if she ever tried to leave. A third text. You have something that belongs to me. Those files from the studio. Return them, and I'll return your money. We can all move on. Don't answer, Maria said, still on hold with the bank. Don't engage. But Eleanor was seeing it clearly now, the full scope of the trap. Alexander had structured everything so that fighting back meant destroying herself. The studio lease was in her name. If she abandoned it, she'd be liable for breaking a 5-year contract. The equipment was registered to her. If she lost it or sold it, she'd be accused of theft or fraud. Her recent success was so entwined with his patronage that speaking out would look like biting the hand that fed her, ungrateful and vindictive. He'd built her up specifically so that tearing him down would require tearing herself down first. He's a genius, Elena said numbly, an evil genius. Maria finally got through to the bank, but the conversation was predictably useless. The transfer had been properly authorized, they claimed. All the security protocols followed. If Ms. Cruz believed there was fraud, she could file a police report and the bank would investigate, a process that typically took 90 to 120 days. When Maria hung up, her face was ashen. We need a lawyer. A good one. With what money? Elena asked. He just took everything I have. And any lawyer good enough to fight him would cost more than I could earn in a year. As if on cue, Elena's phone rang. Not a text this time, but a call from Alexander himself. She stared at the screen, her sister shaking her head frantically, but Elena felt a strange calm descending. This was always going to be the conversation. Might as well have it now. She answered on speaker. What do you want? Elena. His voice was warm, concerned, the voice of someone worried about an irrational friend. I heard about the banking issue. These technical glitches can be so frustrating. I'd be happy to float you some money until it gets resolved. Cut the shit, Alexander. We both know exactly what this is. A pause. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone. I don't appreciate being stolen from. Those files are my property. They were in my studio, documenting my work, my methods. You have no right to them. Your work, Eleanor repeated. Is that what you call systematically abusing women? Work? I call it learning from experience. Every relationship teaches us something. I'm just more rigorous about analysis than most people. His tone was conversational, almost academic. You know what I learned from you, Elena? That women who've been abused before are actually easier, not harder. They come pre-trained to doubt themselves, to accept blame, to try harder to make things work. All I had to do was be slightly better than the last guy, and you were grateful. Maria grabbed Elena's hand, squeezing hard, anchoring her to rage instead of the shame that threatened to swallow her whole. Here's what's going to happen, Alexander continued. You're going to return those files. You're going to sign an NDA, and in exchange I'll return your money and we'll part ways amicably. You can keep the studio, the equipment, everything. Consider it payment for your time. We'll tell people it just didn't work out, no hard feelings. And if I don't, then I destroy you, said simply matter-of-factly. I have lawyers who specialize in this. They'll tie you up in litigation for years, sue you for theft, for breach of contract, for defamation. They'll get court orders blocking you from using any equipment I provided, from showing any work you produced during our relationship, from even claiming the title photographer, since your recent professional identity was built entirely on my investment. By the time they're done, you won't just be broke. You'll be unemployable, unreliable, the cautionary tale people whisper about at gallery openings. Elena's throat was tight, her vision blurring at the edges. Because she believed him. Alexander had the resources, the connections, the cold, strategic mind to do exactly what he threatened. She'd seen him dismantle business competitors with surgical precision. Doing the same to her would be child's play. "Or," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, "we can both be adults about this. You made me better at what I do, Elena. That scene with the camera strap, too heavy-handed, I see that now. The next woman will benefit from that lesson. In a way, you're contributing to progress. Isn't that worth something?" Maria was mouthing, "Hang up." But Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe, caught in the gravity of Alexander's certainty. "I'll give you 24 hours, he said. "After that, the offer expires and we do this the hard way. I don't want to hurt you, Elena. Despite what you think, I did care about you. I still do. But I care about protecting myself more. Don't make me choose." He hung up. The silence in Maria's apartment was deafening, broken only by the sound of Elena's ragged breathing. She'd escaped David's obvious brutality, only to fall into Alexander's sophisticated cruelty, and now she was trapped in a different kind of impossible choice. Fight and lose everything, or surrender and let him win, let him move on to the next woman with lessons learned and methods refined. "We fight," Maria said into the silence, fierce and certain. "We find every woman in those files. We go public. We make so much noise he can't silence all of us." But Elena was thinking about Sophia's voice on that recording, still questioning her decision to leave years later. Was thinking about the other women in those files, the ones who'd signed NDAs and taken settlements and chosen survival over justice. Could she blame them? Could she ask them to sacrifice themselves on the altar of stopping Alexander when it might not even work? When he had the resources to bury any accusation, spin any story? Her phone buzzed with one final text. "Clock's ticking. Choose wisely." Elena looked at her sister, at the files spread across the coffee table, at the life she'd been trying to build, now revealed as a house of cards Alexander had been ready to blow down all along. And she realized with terrible clarity that there was no good choice here, no clean escape, no path that didn't require her to lose something essential. The only question was what she was willing to sacrifice, her safety or her soul. Retry.